Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order our May edition of the Juvenile Detention Board of Managers. With us, in addition to who's in the room today, we have via Zoom, we have Councilwoman Elaine Schaefer, we have Vice Chair Marie Williams, and we have Shakima Fulmore-Townsend, as well as the other half of our very capable solicitorship, Mr. Carlton Johnson. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First, I'd like to announce that we did have an executive session yesterday for matters related to public safety, legal counsel, and contractual matters. First item, or I guess the next item, is public comment. And as with every meeting, we have two rounds of public comment. We have the first round being for matters that are specifically on our agenda for this afternoon. And then at the end of the meeting, there will be another round that can be more broadly associated with anything associated with juvenile detention. And for anyone who would like to address the board, please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Please give your name and address, and please step up to the podium. Any comments from the public? Hearing none, we will move on to the next item for business, which is an approval of the March and April meeting minutes. We had tabled the March minutes because there were a few items that needed to be cleaned up, and so we're approving or putting forward for approval the March and April minutes. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved. This is Shakima Townsend.
Thank you, Ms. Townsend. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any questions or comments on the revised minutes? Hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next item for today is a report from our Juvenile Court and Probation Services with regard to the monthly detained.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kirsten Fitzsimmons from Juvenile Court. On the detention side, we have 2 females who are currently in detention, one in Morgantown, one in Chester County, 1 male who is in Bucks County. On the direct file side, we have 1 female in Morgantown, 1 male in Morgantown, and we currently have 1 youth in Delaware County Prison who is pending an available bid. We have 2 that qualified for detention this week who are given alternative to detentions, and that's it.
Any questions from the board?
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Next, our Superintendent for Juvenile Justice Services, Mr. David Arizari.
Good afternoon, Board. I want to start with our secure detention update. It remains same. We continue to look for available spaces and partner, with the possibility of partner with neighboring counties. There is no major updates in terms of that agenda item. Moving forward, as we wait for our Public Works Director to jump on live, I want to start with the personnel update. Very happy to announce that we were able to bring on 2 new hires, Ms. Kirshner Hilliard and Mr. Nelson Walker. Mr. Walker will be our Community Development Supervisor. Want to give a brief overview of his bio. So, Mr. Walker received his Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Pittsburgh and his Master's of Science in Psychology from the University of Phoenix. He's a dedicated leader with over 25 years of professional experience, focused on juvenile detention programming and reform, with a particular interest in youth-led, family-focused recovery systems. He's a highly driven, motivated to support youth and their goals. He's committed to designing systems that lead youth, family, and community excellence. He's held almost every position there is in juvenile detention for the last 27 years. Formerly was a Deputy Commissioner of Juvenile Justice in the City of Philadelphia from 2019 to 2021. He was the Executive Director of the Juvenile Justice Service Center from 2014 to 2019. He was a Residential Director of the Youth Study Center from 2008 to 2014. And prior to serving these administrative roles, he was both a supervisor and a counselor in the Youth Study Center. He has also served as a training facility for the National Juvenile Detention Association, with his focus on cultural, interpersonal sensitivity, safety, and security with effective communication and conflict resolution. Most importantly, Mr. Walker is a dedicated father and husband. Mr. Walker starts on Wednesday. I asked him to just come in today. I won't ask him to give any public comment. Just, you know, when the meeting concludes, I offer you all just to give Mr. Walker a warm welcome and hello. Mr. Walker, if you can, put your hand up. Moving forward, Ms. Kirshner Hilliard, who will serve as our Deputy Director. She also received her Bachelor's of Science degree in accounting from the University of North Carolina. She has a master's degree in business finance from Lincoln University. Also has over 32 years experience working with local government, as well as nonprofit agencies, providing oversight, management to all funding sources and staff. She started her career as a fiscal director in the Mayor's Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity, also known as CEO, for the City of Philadelphia from 1990 to 2005. She then went on to be the operations manager for the Philadelphia Urban Affairs Coalition from 2005 to 2013. She transitioned back into local government, where she served as a director of operations / the director of finance and grant management for the City of Philadelphia's Managing Director's Office from 2013 to 2022. Over the last several years, in addition to providing fiscal oversight, she submitted high-level grant proposals and was awarded federal and state funding, organized agency development and moves, and negotiated and managed major contracts for over several millions of dollars. She says her goal is to always ensure that we are in compliance with the terms of those entrusting us with taxpayer dollars. Again, Ms. Hilliard, to my left, welcome her. Ready, and as a group, we are ready to get to work. Does anybody have any questions just in regards to these positions and maybe some of their functionality and how we hope to move forward? I know we discussed it on the March 15th meeting. Just very happy to have a team aboard. Looking forward to working with this group and what we're able to accomplish moving forward.
Any questions or comments from the board?
I was just
Is there
wondering,
a comment?
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just very quickly wanted to welcome the new team members. I know a fair amount about Nelson Walker's work, and I'm really excited that he and Ms. Hilliard will be joining the team at Delco. I think we're in great hands with this trio. Thank you.
And I just had a question. Welcome. I was wondering if we could, at your convenience, could you give us a copy of the job descriptions just so we can start better understand
Sure.
how you're setting up the office?
Sure.
Thank you.
For my part, I'd like to, also welcome you to Delaware County and appreciate your coming on board. We have put in Mr. Irizarry's capable hands a lot to do in reimagining juvenile detention in Delaware County, and really in many ways kind of starting from scratch, and also ensuring that the way in which we look at juvenile detention isn't looked at in a silo, but rather is done across the continuum of other non-detention services. So I think it's important that we have a team that's capable of doing so and has the relevant experience, and it certainly sounds like Mr. Irizarry has identified two wonderful people for doing so. So thank you.
I just want to compliment Mr. Irizarry on getting to this point. This has been a lot of work done in a short period of time, and I know attracting talent is a challenge, and I'm glad to hear that you got some team members that can help us keep moving the ball forward. So congratulations to you, Mr. Irizarry.
You see now our Public Works Director, Ms. Floyd, is on. Thank you for being on. So our next agenda item, we want to talk about our design committee team that was established in our last board meeting. We were able to meet on May 4th. Ms. Floyd, who's our Public Works Director, is going to be able to give a brief overview of some of the agenda items we talked about. Ms. Floyd, when you're ready, floor is yours.
Okay, my apologies. I was finishing up a RP debrief. Sorry about that. Let me just see if I can get this up. And hopefully you can all see this. Okay, great. So good afternoon. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to meet, I'm Danielle Floyd, and I recently joined the county as the Director of Public Works, and will be partnering with Dave on moving forward in terms of thinking about not only designing and putting together what we would refer to as a program of requirements, but also being able to engage with the facilities committee and then the broader board of managers on recommendations on how to move that forward. Just quickly, in terms of our office and who we are and what we do, we're responsible for the capital project management for all of the county-owned buildings, as well as maintenance of the 46 bridges that are within the county. We have specific responsibility for preparing and bringing forward a capital budget to county council for review, consideration, and approval on an annual basis. And then certainly as we're thinking about moving forward with the Juvenile Detention Center, hopefully soon to be called something else, wanting to be sure that that information and is fully reflected in the capital improvement plan moving forward. So just very briefly and sort of high level, kind of our deliverables in partnering with Dave on this effort and what it is that how our team is going to support him and partner with him in this work. Wanting to be very specific about identifying the program and space needs as we rethink and reimagine what youth rehabilitation services and juvenile justice services will look like in Delaware County. To be able to provide both the facility committee as well as the broader board of managers and eventually bring to county council floor plan and facility options, whether that be in the short term or or in the long term. To be able to provide this committee, at the facilities committee and the board of managers with cost and both for design, construction, and the overall timelines to complete. And then, as I mentioned, be able to finalize a set of options to bring forward to county council for their review, consideration, and approval. So when Dave and I first started to began having conversations in terms of how to approach the work, one of the first things that I said to him was, it doesn't really necessarily start with a floor plan and defining square footage. It really starts with having some critical conversations about program in order for us to be able to put together a concept plan, required square footages that really support and facilitate its success. And so these were some of the questions that I had put forward to Dave, and also I think began to be discussed at the committee meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, but really starting to think about how can we articulate what does the service look like in the county moving forward? What is the model of service and who will it be offered to? And in addition, who will be providing those services? So how many people should we be planning for in a reimagined space? What does engaging with partner agencies look like, and what type of space needs will they have? Again, how many employees should we be planning and programming for? What's the maximum number of youth that we should be considering, assuming in our program of design? And then whether or not we want to consider space for other youth who may need placements from other counties, kind of similar to what is happening now in terms of our reliance on other counties to support the work as it currently exists. So we had our first design committee meeting on May 4th. And I think, Dave, you would agree, was, I think, a very robust and healthy conversation, really beginning to dive into some of those questions and a lot of other pieces that our office will need in order to be able to put together what I like to refer to as kind of that program of requirements. And so just kind of highlighting some of the things that were discussed at the meeting. And Dave, I'll yield to you if there's anything you want to elaborate on. But I know you spent an extensive amount of time just talking about the data in terms of what the data tells us about how many youth have gone through JDC, what their average length of stay was, as well as the demographics. So maybe I'll stop there, and if there was anything that you wanted to highlight from that.
from our partners as well. But just collectively, we looked at the average length of stay of a young person historically here in the county. It was around 16 days. We looked at the demographic that was most affected. It was African American males between the ages of 16, 17 plus. We're going to take a deeper dive into what area specifically that demographic comes into. So I think as a group, we really wanted to take a deeper dive and look at, what is the area concern, right? And what can the numbers tell us here? And as we continue to get the information, we'll present it out and look forward to our next meeting, me having a lot of the information present so our board can digest as well. Council President, you were part of this committee as well. I don't know if you had any input, as well as our Vice Chair, Marie Williams, if you have any feedback in terms of what we talked about in the meeting.
I think for us, it was really trying to go and get a baseline of what we were thinking and what you were thinking moving forward in terms of how many rooms, what other amenities, what other activities would be happening in this area, and what we might think are other programs we want to bring in, and what type of space requirements those are. I think it was really just trying to get a base in that first meeting that we had.
And I don't have anything to add, just thank you for putting this together. It makes our conversation look a lot more focused than it felt in the moment, but this is really great. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dave. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I've said, moving on to the item 2 on the list, when we talked about a mixed method approach. Again, we looked at historically a young person only residing in detention for 16 days before they move on to the next intervention, whether that's community supervision or long-term placement. And collectively as a group, we understood that the time that we have young people is extremely important, and 16 days isn't a lot of time. So we talked about ways that collectively we can still have touch points with young people who are in the system and help prevent them from coming back to the center. I'm sorry, Danielle.
Oh, no, it's okay. I mean, I was just going to just build on that. I think what I heard also was really, I think, a lot of discussion focused on the prevention as well as reentry is, I think, one of the points that was one of the points of discussion that came up, that it shouldn't just be focused solely on detention, that there really is a continuum here that we should be looking and trying to support. I think there was also discussion about, accommodating for the partner agencies and services. And I remember, Dave, I hope I got this right. It was was it JJDP Act that I remember you had talked about and shared at the meeting, and what that impact has on how we have to think about juvenile justice services moving forward as well.
For the public who isn't familiar, December 21st of 2021, any young person who commits alleged adult crimes during that detention phase will be housed in a detention facility. We looked at some of that data, and we looked at historically Delaware County having around 23 young people who fit that criteria. And we're working with the courts to really get 23 in what course of a year, or 23 in a year. I apologize. Yeah. And the most we've seen in a quarter, which is 3 months, was 8. So again, we're working with the courts around getting some data around what the average length of stay. What we looked at is their length of stay has been much longer and can be much longer than your average 16 days, in which we're historically dealing with. So that may have an impact on the number of beds we need as well, just because we have to accommodate for those young people who can potentially remain in the center for a lot longer than what a traditional detention youth would.
Again, I think there was a lot of conversation or good conversation about, how the county can utilize this as an opportunity to partner with agencies who may provide complementary services or can help to augment some of the services that would need to be provided here. And then, Dave, I think you had also shared just some examples of other facilities that you were just aware of, both locally as well as, I think we have someone that mentioned New York and Baltimore as potential models to either to visit and to examine as we start to think about what the program looks like here.
And I will continue to organize. I have 2 on the calendar, which our subcommittee will receive those dates in order to just continue to look at what our partnering sites look like, just to continue to aspire the group on reaching for the stars in terms of a design.
So I think in our next meeting, which is this Wednesday, there were some things and Dave, I think you would agree, where we didn't come to sort of a final decision, but I kind of noted them as sort of additional considerations and items that would require additional conversations to be able to get to some final decisions. And I know there was a lot of conversation about, just thinking about what are the total number of beds we should be planning for, and then a lot of sort of follow-up questions and what is the data to be able to substantiate what that number is and what that will be. There was conversation about whether or not we utilize the location of a juvenile justice center, whether having it in a sort of a single location with all services being held there, or whether or not we may want to think about having multiple sites or multiple locations, depending on the type of activities or functions that will be occurring. Whether or not we wanted to differentiate between sort of the lower level offenses or in detention elsewhere. And then I think, and I know, Dave, you had also mentioned it may be a little bit difficult to be able to pull this data, but also just trying to understand as best we can where our youth are coming from to be able to form kind of informed discussions around location. There were discussions in terms of what assumptions should we be making in a program of requirements around that length of stay. And I think some really good discussion about, well, what is the reason for the 16 days? And is there any way to improve upon that? There may not be, but I think what I heard was it being raised as an area to at least to ask the question and understand. Conversations about recidivism and how many youth who have gone through juvenile detention coming back, and is there opportunity to be able to address not having being able to not have youth repeat that same cycle, and so what does that look like? Whether or not the county is open to whether or not this facility, whether it's again in its existing location or depending on where looking at other options, how it can accommodate some of the other, maybe other county needs that we have in terms of service to youth. And then there was being very clear that for the pieces around detention, what those components were. And I heard in that conversation at least 5 pieces around the evaluation piece, the educational services, mentorship and opportunities to make connections, health services, as well as being able to have a space to plan for post-release. And as just listed as some of the high-level pieces that the detention piece really needs to be structured, and these are some of the components that needed to be included in there. So as I mentioned, we're meeting again next on Wednesday, and one of my other sort of immediate next steps is we have what we call an on-call contract with architects and engineers, and looking to identify or finalize selection of a firm to be able to work through and participate in these discussions moving forward to put together that program of requirements, and be able to share that again with the facilities committee, and then bring that to the Board of Management for review and consideration as well. Was there anything that I missed, Dave, in that update from the first meeting that you think might be important to share?
Yeah, I think that was great. But if you could, can you maybe touch base on once our committee is able to develop a concept and a design, realistically, what's the timeline to get that before the board for them to vote on?
I was sharing that I think there's sort of this very interesting balance of understanding the need for urgency, but also wanting to make sure that we've done thoughtful conversation and care and consideration of this to be able to bring forward a product, bring forward a program that makes sense. And so just looking at some examples from other projects that I've seen in terms of the development of concept and design, I've seen them fall in kind of that 4 to 6 month range. Again, a lot of this will depend on how quickly we can align on what are the critical functions, what are the critical activities, what does this program look like, and But that's kind of the general time frame, at least in my short tenure in the county, that I've seen in terms of being able to bring a concept and program up for review and consideration and conversation.
Our Department of Human Services, I've also met with Chester High School leadership to get their perspective as well from the community and parent side. So we're trying to look at this at all angles to having a completely inclusive process, and hopefully we're able to come to a happy medium here that the board can vote on.
Are there questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, I have some
I
questions.
just want to
or
oh. Go ahead, Joanne.
Thank you for that information. Thank you, Danielle. That was very informative, and thanks to the committee. I guess a bottom line for me is that we're looking at a bricks and mortar facility of some sort, whether it's got programmatic elements to it. We had a school, we had a gym, but there's a bricks and mortar. And I appreciate the idea of going to design, but I do have concerns about an effective design without a budget or the licensing requirements for space, facilities. So I know that our attorneys are working on that, I believe, with the design committee. So I really, I stress that I will be looking for that informing the design a lot, as well as the things that we would want to see or that some people would want to see. So I really think that we need to have that for the design committee. I also think that we can definitely expect longer stays with the direct reports. That's being borne out already. And, I think, I've also mentioned that I believe that they're working on a checklist of what we would need for the building. So I know we have, different campuses throughout the committee. We have throughout the county, excuse me. We have, we have a lot of capital projects that are potentially out there. So I know Danielle's on top of all that. I'm hoping that we can integrate all that at the same time, but I do really want to focus from my viewpoint on the bricks and mortar to solve that critical acute problem while we also develop the program, diversion programs, and the other things that people are looking at. But I'm really looking at this as a bricks and mortar issue initially. So I just want you to know where my view is. So I'm hoping we can get a design with a budget at some point, which we'll need, and also the licensing requirements.
Yeah, and I think in response to that, as you alluded to, and as confirmed by our solicitor, the solicitors are in ongoing conversation with the state around licensing requirements. I think that's playing a part of the subcommittee work, and will continue to inform the views on the best path. I think as Ms. Floyd, our Public Works Director, alluded to, we have to simultaneously be having a consideration for the immediate term and the urgency of what we need there, as well as the long term, so that we don't, overemphasize near term and therefore do something that in the long term is not wise and is not in the best interest of the county and those affected by this area. So it's really a balance, and I think topics of location, there may be reasons for expediency that argue for the current footprint, and there may be reasons why you're actually more expedient looking elsewhere. So I think that all that has to really be taken into account, and I think they are. I see the solicitor would like to speak, and I know, I think it was Ms. Formula Townsend who wanted to also comment, but solicitor?
Yeah.
Shelley Smith, solicitor for the Juvenile Detention Board of Managers. I just wanted to note that one of the challenges, and as you noted, Controller Phillips, we are working with the design committee. We are on the design committee subcommittee, and so we are working with them. But just to make clear, like some of the issues of licensing are going to directly relate to the choices that the county makes about the size of the number of children that the facility is going to house and that kind of thing, because some of the licensing requirements depend on that, right? So there's a certain amount of space. For example, there's a certain amount of space required for a single bedroom or a shared bedroom, and ceiling height and distance from bathrooms and things like that. And so all of those things are going to depend on the choices that ultimately this board makes in terms of the number of children that you're going to want to serve and the programs and services related to that. So we are working with the committee, but one of the challenges of just sort of providing kind of sterile requirements is that, like, there are some basic requirements, but the specific requirements of this facility are going to be related to the choices that the county makes about some of these factors that Danielle described. So just we are putting this together, as we have mentioned before, but I just wanted to sort of give you and the rest of the board kind of an understanding of where the challenge is in terms of just presenting license requirements without having some of the specifics. So the two things directly relate to each other. And so we'll fold them all in to sort of give the board an understanding of how that will work.
That would be great. I guess my concern was I was hesitant to send an architect out to start designing without knowing what our parameters are, because we could design something that's far beyond what's needed or less than that's needed and then have to redo it or something. So I know that you'll protect us in that regard. I just want the board and the public to know that that's where I'm coming from.
Ms. Fillmore Townsend, I think you had something?
Yes, thank you. First, I wanted to compliment the committee on the use of data. I think that this is the most targeted conversation we've had about the progress to date, and I think it is a great start. I want to reiterate my support for the integration of both paths, and I think that Mr. Irizarry, you gave us a great overview of how you wanted to explore and discover what the best options were. It may be helpful to also put together the way you see this process unfolding for us, so we can manage our expectations. And then the last thing that I wanted to reiterate is I think form follows function. And so we have to have the detailed, hard conversations about which services and how and what's the approach that we're going to, so that the physical bricks and mortar can accommodate and support the intent of our transformation. And I just don't want us to lose sight of, I get there are many complexities to where we're going and multiple paths that we're walking on. So I think a comprehensive overview with a timeline, or at least the key considerations, would be really helpful for us as we go through this process as a board.
Anything else from board members?
Yeah, I'd like to echo the thanks for the work that's been done so far. Two things. One, the 5 components that were mentioned before. There's one more component that I want to just throw out there for us to think about. And maybe it was housed in one of those other components, but having a space or the ability to welcome families and support systems, and have it, very rarely does a child end up in juvenile detention with there not being something going on in their household. So, figuring out a way to integrate services beyond just the behavior that is exhibited to get them in juvenile detention, I think that's really important. And then secondly, I note that that the committee is going to be looking at some of our neighbors at their spaces, which I think is really smart. I would also I'd love to see us look beyond what is typically done, and I don't know where you look, but in universities or think tanks or other countries of progressive approaches that may be different than what our neighbors do typically in the Northeast. And I'm just wondering if that sort of inquiry is going to happen. We have so many great minds on this board, and now just hiring that have probably some pretty good connections to, criminal justice thought. So I'd love to see us look beyond just what is done in this region and see if there may be some more progressive and interesting models out there.
I think that's why Mr. Irizarry and the board at large has been making those connections and relationships with more national level organizations. So I don't know if you want to just briefly allude to that.
Yeah, sure. So I think we've reached out to multiple folks, including CCLP, which is Children's Law and Policy Center, and Casey Foundation. These are folks who nationally have done this work, bringing on folks like Mr. Nelson Walker, who has connections throughout the Commonwealth. We're just going to continue to think outside the box. And I think one thing that we talked about, Councilwoman, that may or may not put a smile on their face is the holistic approach. Understanding, again, that 16 days with a young person isn't a lot of time to change their lives, but having a component at the center where young people are able to come back, whether they're court ordered or they choose to, and receive services holistically, not just them, their families, we think is very important, and getting ahead of changing some of the data that we've seen here in the county.
Anything else from the board on this topic?
I just wanted to throw out one other thing. If we found that this design really requires some expertise that we don't have under contract under one of our, we should look for that. You know, if there's a specialty planner or designer that works on, you know, new updated facilities, we might want to consider that. I wouldn't foreclose that at all. I mean, council would have to look at it too, but it may be that we don't have the person on contract right now. So we found for the Jail Oversight Board that there were really some tremendously experienced consultants out there that really understand what's going on in this area. So
I think one positive of many positives that came out of our meeting with juvenile probation and the courts was they really wanted us to look at an architect that focused in trauma-informed design. I think that's something that we have to look into as well, and I'll continue to work with Danielle from Public Works to make sure, you know, we satisfy that.
And lastly, I'd just like to thank the members of the board who have stepped up and volunteered to be members of the subcommittee to make sure that we're advancing this critical part of what our tasks are as expediently as possible. So thank you to them.
Thank you, board.
Thank you, Mr. Irizarry. Next item for today, any old business to bring before the board?
Yes, I just wanted to touch base with Mr. Irizarry. I know that you wanted to, I think the board approved you going out and creating an RFP for the data that you wanted to do and look at. I just wanted to check where we are in that process and kind of what you needed from us to move it forward.
Yeah, so I think I've drafted the scope. Mr. Resnick, who's County's Council new Criminal Justice Liaison, I wanted him to put a set of eyes on it, hopefully to have that on the agenda for the next meeting, in which we can vote on moving forward after you all review. So again, you know, collecting some of the baseline data, and our overall strategy is really to look at what the data tells and coming up with a collective approach on how to better service young people who are in the criminal justice system, what services, what areas need it the most, and then at some point working with DHS as well as juvenile probation to make sure all our programs specifically align toward the areas of concern and measure it over a set of 2 to 3 years to see what type of impact we have. So you know, that is drafted, just kind of looking at some of the powers to be to give some feedback. It'll be before the board in our June meeting for us to vote on and take a look at. You guys will have it prior to review.
Thanks for raising that. Any other old business for today? Any new business from the board? Hearing none. Now is the next round of public comments. So if there's anyone who would like to address the board on matters related to juvenile detention, please go to the podium, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less, and start with providing us with your name and your address.
Hello, my name is Leroy Ambrose. The address is 38 Harding Avenue, Morton, PA. 19070. So I currently have a outpatient clinic office for therapy for juveniles, or for everyone, but we're focusing on juveniles. And what we noticed that there's been a long wait list, and or services that they can't utilize based on transportation or things of that nature. And so we're trying to look at creating a program that we can utilize here in the county to reach all of the youth that may come through our doors, whether it's an alternative to placement or as a step down from placement, where we work with not only the child, but the entire family. Again, allowing the child to be the lead, understanding the assessments and needs of that child, and then working with not only the child, but the entire family. Working with whatever their needs may be, whether it's education, we have tutors on board to be able to help them out, on that educational piece. We have some vocational people that will be our job coaches and reaching out to the community members to help with getting them placed, whether it's an internship or even possible employment. I've been reaching out to several community leaders and members to be mentors, to come in and talk, and to really work with the juveniles to unlearn a lot of their behaviors. A lot of our children have unhealthy behaviors because that's what they learn and that's what they see. Children live what they learn. And through our program, the Unlearn program, we want to break down some of these thinking errors, some of these negative behaviors, and work with them in adapting new behaviors to allow them to be successful well past their juvenile years. Our goal is to work with kids from 12 on up, understanding what their future goals may be, and allow them to understand their purpose. And within that is getting the family involved so that they are an essential member of the team to allow us to be able to support them in a way that's healthy, productive, so that they can thrive. So I don't know if there's any questions. I know that there's just a short period of time.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for coming in. And what I would encourage you to do is, if you haven't already, to follow up with our superintendent, Mr. Azari, to find if there are ways to work together.
Absolutely. What I did, I have some brochures here. I created folders, giving you an understanding of who I am and what we're trying to do for the community.
Thank you. You
So-
just leave it with Mr. Azari, and
Absolutely.
we'll pass that.
Are you a current provider to the county through Human Services or anything like that?
No, I'm
Okay.
not. We do work with some of the juveniles that's been referred, and we utilize their insurance right now, but it's limited based on openings and clinicians availability.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Real quick, what capacity do you have? How many young people can you serve within a year?
Well, we're looking at 50, but if there's a need for more, we could be, amenable to, increasing that number.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Susan Duncan. I live at 317 Valley View Road. I'm in Upper Providence Township. And some of what I'm going to say today may be redundant, but I heard recently that there was a push to reopen the juvenile detention facility. And I just felt morally I had to come here to express my concerns about that. The county facility has a history of abuse and neglect, and it's my understanding that there's still ongoing investigations into the incidents that happened there. Abuses in this type of facility are not unique to Delaware County. In fact, they are nationwide. But here in Delaware County, we have an opportunity to improve the way we address these kinds of problems. We could consider alternative approaches to the treatment of our troubled youth. It is in everyone's interest to arrive at the best solution, not a rushed solution. Our children are our future. I want to encourage you to explore alternatives to treatment of children with problems, such as those put forth by Columbia University Justice Lab, their community-based alternatives for incarcerated youth. And I have a listing here of some of the things that they do: diversion from formal criminal legal system, community mentoring and support programs, intensive in-home supports, behavior change interventions, temporary out-of-home treatment, and residential treatment programs such as group homes. Not long ago, I had the opportunity to hear a presentation by Margot Eisman and Emily Robb of the Youth Sentencing and Reentry Project. And during that presentation, I learned that in 2018, compared to its share of statewide youth population, Delaware County had more children tried as adults, more adjudications, fewer diversions, and about the same number of placements. This indicated to me that for some reason I can't explain, children in Delaware County are often not seen as being children. There is a famous quote attributed to Mahatma Gandhi that states, "The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members." Children with problems are among our most vulnerable community members. I know we can do better here in Delaware County. I've seen so much amazing work being done by County Council over the past few years. The deprivatization of George W. Hill Correctional Facility, the creation of Delaware County's very own health department, and the acquisition and preservation of green space. All of these initiatives are transformational.
If you could just wrap it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So now we must continue this work and put our best efforts into solutions that will benefit our troubled youth, their families, and our communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Belkin. And I will just, in response, I hope that you do see that this board is making every effort to think more broadly about how youth are handled. With that said, I also have to be clear that the decisions around whether or not an individual youth is to be detained or not is something that lies with the judiciary. And when a judge in their wisdom decides that a youth, in the interest of the safety of that youth or the public, needs to be detained, this group has an obligation to make sure that we do so. So I do appreciate your comments, and in no way am I trying to undermine the truth of them, but I hope you understand the obligation that this board has. And in terms of the facility itself, you know, I want to separate brick and mortar from what is done from a management perspective. And I think it's important to understand that the allegations, which is what they are, and they are being investigated, occurred prior to the creation of this board. And it is certainly possible that within a facility that perhaps did or did not have things that had occurred or did not occur that none of us would want to see, that doesn't prejudice the fact that under new management, you can have positive outcomes for individuals. So, you know, I certainly appreciate the comments, and I hope that you understand that those thoughts are certainly reflected in our work. Anything else from the public?
My name is Mary Austin, 1036 First Avenue, Media, PA 19063. I just wanted to kind of reiterate my concern about reopening the facility. Also wanted to ask directly, I know you mentioned a few organizations outside of this that think kind of outside of the normal box that you work with, but have you been in touch with the Columbia at all, or are there other organizations aside from the two that you mentioned that you've been in touch with, getting maybe data from, accepted support from?
Yeah, very well connected with Columbia Lab. We've been talking as well.
And I'm sorry, you may have said it and I missed it, but could you just, for the record, provide your name and address?
Oh, Mary T. Austin, T for Tanita, 1036 First Avenue, Media, PA 19063.
Thank you.
And I also wanted to know, because of all the horrors that happen in the detention center, how is the team looking at training and just how to recruit people to work within the facility, knowing that we have a mental health crisis in the county now and difficulty finding people to work in those types of fields?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to training, we have to look at it from all angles, and it starts with paying folks better, right? At that point, within that training period, making sure trauma-informed care, you know, how to address a crisis and things of that nature, handle with care, all those specific trainings. But it's all about changing the culture for me, right? So, you know, folks there are not officers, they're counselors. And other things within recommendations of our subcommittee. We just want to make sure that rehabilitation is at the top of our mind when it comes to young people, and I think everything that encompasses that we're going to consider and try to incorporate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other comments from the public? All right, hearing none. Any last thoughts from members of the board? I will offer up one, which is that I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce to the board our new program manager for criminal justice, community justice, and rehabilitation, who was alluded to earlier, Mr. Michael Resnick. And just a bit of background. This is a position that County Council created recently, and Mr. Resnick joined the county last week because, you know, as we've talked to a lot over the course of these months, there is so much that and this really goes outside of just juvenile detention, but in overall criminal justice, community justice, we want to make sure that within an inherently siloed system, because of the nature of the system legally, that we are ensuring that we're connecting the dots, that we have someone who can look across the various silos of community justice and ensuring that we are all kind of rowing in the same direction, that information is shared as efficiently as possible, and that we're providing the resources where necessary so that folks like Mr. Irizarry and his team are tapping into the relevant agencies around the county. So Mr. Resnick comes from a background that I'd say we are incredibly grateful to have someone of his experience set, both locally and non-locally, to help with everything we're doing here. And Mike, if you'd like to take a second to address the board and talk a little bit about your background, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilman Madden. I am happy to be here. As you said, I have a little bit of experience in this area. I've been working in law enforcement, criminal justice, corrections for almost 30 years. I know I don't look that old. I'm a lawyer by background and training. I was the public safety director in the city of Philadelphia, overseeing police, prisons, fire, reentry, and some ancillary departments. I was also the Chief of Staff and Director of Legal Affairs at the Philadelphia Prison System, Acting Commissioner at the Philadelphia Prison System, and I've spent the last almost six years in the city of Baltimore as the Commissioner of their prison system and overseeing pretrial supervision in the community. In Baltimore City, we were under court supervision. That case had been in existence for probably 30 years. And it wasn't until the last 6 years that we've actually became substantially compliant with many of the provisions of the settlement agreement. We were able to get rid of all of the provisions regarding conditions of confinement, and we made major progress in the provisions regarding mental health and physical health. It's no coincidence that that was the 6 years that I was there. So I'm happy to be here in Delaware County to assist council in implementing some change in criminal justice and making it better for the community at large. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Resnick. And I'll just mention he is serving directly under county council. He was hired after a truly exhaustive search near and wide, and his hiring was informed by stakeholders across the county, various departments of criminal justice. So we're very, very lucky to have him here. Anything else from the board before we close things up for today? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?